that the role of the CIO has changed totally. You know, we were software developers and architects, and we could tell you what RAM to use based on its transactional speed. Do you think any of that matters anymore? The answer is no.
Welcome to This Week in Health IT, where we discuss the news, information, and emerging thought with leaders from across the healthcare industry. My name is Bill Russell, recovering healthcare CIO, writer, and advisor with the previously mentioned HealthLyrics.
I was the CIO for a 23,000-person health system, and one of the biggest challenges was to remain current on the technology and the trends that were going on myself.
Think of artificial intelligence as a orchestra. Right now, machine learning, deep learning is getting a lot of attention, so I sort of equate that to the string section. And obviously there are many sections to the orchestra, so someday soon, hospitals, healthcare organizations can be able to have amazing music.
We are seeing instances of folks popping up, us included, where we're having a primary care physician set up with the dentist in the same office.
I would love to get to the space where eventually we're using voice recognition to do all of our navigation throughout the electronic health record.
When we worked at Microsoft, oftentimes, you'd have crazy deadlines. People would say, look, we're not saving anyone's life here. We can't say that anymore. And we love that. It's like we can save someone's life. We can prevent a complication or a readmission by catching it.
A lot of the feedback people are hearing about former Vice President's remarks is that he was remarkably pragmatic. And then the one that I'm most excited about, he notes that the Medicare Innovation Center, which was created by the Affordable Care Act, has the legal authority to experiment with new models to engage patients for purposes of getting better value care.
Hyper-consumerism driving everything to a digital experience, because if we don't make it easy for patients like ourselves to use healthcare on our smart devices, companies like Apple are starting to do it for us.
I think we're right on the cusp of a huge digital transformation. It'll be interesting to see how CIOs sort of address that.
Thank you for downloading this episode of This Week in Health IT. At my house, where I'm at right now in this studio, I actually have a really great setup for high-speed internet, great sound, some lighting to do the show. But from time to time, I have to be on the road to record the show, and this is one of those episodes. I was in a hotel with a pretty bad internet connection, so I apologize ahead of time. Some of the sound and video is not going to sync up real well, but it is a phenomenal episode. Todd Johnson has a lot to offer. If you can't stand watching the back and forth in the video, I encourage you strongly to download the podcast on iTunes or Google Play and just listen to it, because then you won't see the disparity. So thanks again for downloading. Hope you enjoy the episode.
Welcome to This Week in Health IT, where we discuss the news, information, and emerging thought with leaders from across the healthcare industry. This is episode number 41. Today we discuss how those pesky millennials are changing healthcare. Plus, we take a moment to highlight empathy within healthcare. This podcast is brought to you by HealthLyrics. Health systems are moving to the cloud to gain agility, efficiency, and new capabilities. Work with a trusted partner that's been moving health systems to the cloud since 2010. Visit healthlyrics.com to schedule your free consultation. My name is Bill Russell, recovering healthcare CIO, writer, and advisor with the previously mentioned HealthLyrics. Before I get to our guests, we want to thank our listeners who have given us such great feedback. The show's popularity in the first year has exceeded all of our expectations. If you have a topic or a CIO guest that you would like to see on the show, please drop me a line. Some people have asked me, how can they get their CIO on the show? You can send me an email at thisweekinhealthit@gmail.com. That's the best way to get a hold of us. Be sure to share the show with your colleagues as we continue to bring great guests like today's. I like having new guests on the show. Today's guest is a digital entrepreneur and someone whose perspective on the space I greatly respect. Todd Johnson is the CEO of HealthLoop. Good morning, Todd. Welcome to the show.
Morning, Bill. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so we were talking a little before the show started that you guys have been in this space almost since its infancy. I mean, your company started in 2009, which in dog years is almost like a century in digital healthcare. So, tell us a little bit about your journey as a company.
Yeah, so I joined HealthLoop at the end of 2012, early 2013. And it's interesting, I had no intention of jumping back into another early stage company. But I met the founder of HealthLoop, Jordan Schlane, who had sort of recognized a very obvious hole in our healthcare delivery system, which is we do a really wonderful job of treating patients when they're in the clinic, when they're in the hospital, but the standard of care when a patient is discharged is no care. And what could we do, right, if we wanted to make sure every patient got the best outcome possible? And you can imagine continuous follow-up and compassion from a doctor reaching out to a patient every day to make sure that patient is getting the care they need. And the fact is, we just can't do that at scale, right? We don't have enough doctors and nurses on planet Earth to do that. And so the idea of automation and finding ways to reach patients to deliver the right information at the right time really had a strong appeal for me. So I found myself moving my family across the country and jumping into Silicon Valley, which is a crazy experience, particularly over the last few years. I mean, digital health has been such a rock and roll area with so much innovation, success, and failure. And I think that it's been really fun to watch this industry sort of mature from early ideas to really beginning to see things hit the market at truly large scale.
So clearly you've made the transition. And, here's another thing I found interesting. So we've known each other a number of years. I think Darren Dorkin from Cedars was the first one who mentioned that I should take a look at your technology. And we started talking back when I was a CIO at St. Joe's. However, we were talking recently, I think it was an Avia event, and we found out that we actually went to the same high school in Pennsylvania. And it's amazing that we went a good 4 or 5 years being colleagues in work and not really knowing that we had graduated from the same small town high school back in Pennsylvania. So you were a part of the Freedom High School.
It's a small world, and
yeah, it is amazing. So you were part of the Freedom High School marching band. Give people an idea, because I try to describe this to people and they just don't get it. But when Freedom and Liberty, which are the two high schools in Bethlehem, very patriotic place, come together and play their big football game, the two bands come out on the field. Describe that for people. I've tried to describe it and people struggle to get their arms around it. It is pretty amazing.
It is an amazing thing. And I still keep in touch with my band director from 20 years ago. And, in Eastern Pennsylvania, wrestling is king, football is king, but band is really viewed like sport. When I was a junior and a senior in Freedom, I was, the band president, the orchestra president. I played tuba. I was the biggest band nerd at the school. And, the Freedom Liberty game was so much fun. And I'll tell you just a brief story. It is pretty funny. We actually would do reconnaissance, because at the halftime show for that game, each band would try and up each other. But then we always did a show on the field together. And you'd have 450 kids out on the field. And it was really a spectacle. And one year, we did some reconnaissance on Liberty High School and saw that they were going to do this secret where they were going to elevate one of their drummers onto a stand and sort of rotate him around and drum. And so when we got that reconnaissance the day before the big game, we not only mimicked that, but then we got all of our sousaphones, which are the big tubas, to line up around him and do this kind of dance where we almost hit each other in the head. And we one-upped them, and they never let it. Healthy competition for band nerds.
Yeah, in reconnaissance. Yeah, the Battle of the Bands, that was a big deal. They would do all sorts of crazy things during the halftime show, and it was a lot of fun. All right, well let's get to the show. One of the things we like to do with our guests is start with a pretty open-ended question, just to get us started. What are some of the things you're working on today that you're excited about?
Yeah, I mean, specifically, we spike in the patient engagement realm of digital health, and I think that can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people. For us, it's about continuously engaging patients throughout an acute episode of care, deliver the right information at the right time, measure how they're doing. And I think three things that really are exciting is, A, we're seeing this go to scale. I mean, in some communities around the country, hundreds of thousands of at-home sort of automated patient visits a month, which is really quite rewarding. And now that we have enough data, there are real validated outcomes. So not only do we know that this is intuitively a good thing, like how can you help guide patients to good outcomes, but that it really does impact patient experience in significant ways. Patients have less failure, fewer mortalities, and the data is crystal clear. So I begin to think of these technologies really as almost medical interventions that can help to improve quality. And I think there's sort of two other things that are happening at an industry level that are really beginning to spur growth. One is the federal government and commercial payers are recognizing that these things do in fact impact costs and outcomes, and are now beginning to pay provider organizations when they use these technologies, which I think is the right answer. And secondly, as the capabilities mature, they're beginning to spread out. So, for us, when we started, it was really a one-to-one between the doctor and their patients. And now that is expanded to include the hospital, the doctor, the cardiac rehab center, post-acute care providers, physical therapists, all connected together and all connected to the patient. And we're starting to see this sort of network effect in communities where more and more providers are connected to their patients and can collaborate for better outcomes.
Yeah, no, it is exciting. And I think we're going to touch on that in both stories in the news section. So I'm looking forward to delving in here. In fact, we'll just go into. So on our show, we do two segments. We do In the News and Soundbites. In the news, we both pick a news story and discuss. And then the Soundbites, I've come up with 5 questions to ask you about. Primarily, we're going to talk about your entrepreneurial journey and what really differentiates your product set. And it's something that really impressed me when we had our first conversation. So I'll kick us off with our first story. Our first story comes from the Washington Post. For millennials, a regular visit to the doctor's office is not a primary concern, is the headline. And I'll just read the first section here because I think it gives a pretty good understanding of where they're coming from. So Calvin Brown doesn't have a primary care doctor. Since his graduation last year from the University of San Diego, Brown has held a series of jobs that have taken him to several California cities. As a young person in a nomadic state, Brown said, he prefers finding a walk-in clinic on the rare occasion when he's sick. The whole going to the doctor phenomenon is something that's fading away from our generation, said Brown, who now lives in Daly City outside San Francisco. It means getting in a car and going to a waiting room. In his view, urgent care, which costs him about $40 a visit, is more convenient. Like speed dating, services are rendered in a quick manner. Brown's views appear to be shared by millennials, the 83 million Americans born between 1981 and 1996, who constitute the nation's biggest generation. Their preferences for convenience, fast service, connectivity, and price transparency are upending the time-honored model of office-based primary care. And this is backed up by a Kaiser Foundation study that was done that essentially says the millennials at about a 40-some-odd% clip do not have primary care physicians and are seeking alternate methods for getting their care when they need it. And not as much the other generations, but still a pretty high percentage from where I sit. It's like 25% for some of the older generations that are relying pretty heavily on urgent care and other venues. So, let's just start with this. I mean, what do you think this means for healthcare? Let's start with this. We'll go back and forth on that. So, if this trend continues, what will this mean for healthcare?
Yeah, well, I think looking in the rearview mirror, it's sort of obvious to see how we got here, right? I think medicine has optimized around how do you sell as many tests, visits, and procedures as with massive throughput. That's the sort of the game, right? Yeah. And I think what that means from a patient's perspective is we've had less and less time with our doctors. It's all too frequently the experience that you end up sitting in the waiting room for an hour and a half, and then you get 7 minutes, and then you're out the door. And so I think if we think back to the olden days of medicine with a deep relationship with your physician that really understood you, your family, and your concerns, that sort of disappeared, right? And what that leaves us with is people that are seeking something that is more convenient, right? We live, obviously, I mean, the last 15, 20 years has just been explosive in terms of how technologies reduce friction to get to services and make everything faster, easier, and on demand. And medicine will definitely continue to have to address that. And for those urgent care centers that have done that well, I think it's meant that they're stealing market share from traditional primary care physicians, and provided that they can give a high quality, convenient, accessible solution, they'll continue to win. And I think that the trend that's pretty obvious where this all goes is, an urgent care center is kind of an expensive place to go get medicine, right? And we're going to see it increasingly go to virtual or telemedicine as that front edge. Clinics as that next point of triage, and you'll march up. And so I think we're going to continue to see the erosion of the traditional clinic as the first point of care.
Yeah, I don't know about you, but I mean, my family, we had a family doctor. We had Dr. Polliner was our family doctor in Easton, Pennsylvania, and we went there. And actually, all of us, it was our primary care doctor. My mom and dad, my brother and sister, we all went to that same doctor. In fact, his office was on the first floor of his house, and he lived on the second and third floor of this home. And I just remembered, I mean, he was the one who coordinated our care. He ordered the tests, and he was he was a family friend. He actually came to weddings, and he came to those kinds of things. That's such a throwback to an era that is a little different than what we have. So, the value of primary care is really not disputed, and really not disputed in this article. They are a trusted advisor. They are the person that we go to sort out treatment options. Some people fear, in this article, that this trend is going to lead to worse outcomes. And there's a couple of anecdotal stories in there. However, I think the message from millennials is pretty clear, which is, this wait time thing is not something they're used to, nor do they like. They don't like sitting in a room with a bunch of sick people. They don't like the lack of transparency in terms of the cost. They want to know, this is going to be $40. This is going to be $100. This is going to be $1,000. Just tell me what it's going to be ahead of time. So they want that transparency. And an urgent care visit sort of has it. It's, you go in and they say, it's going to be $40, it's going to be $80, whatever it's going to be. There's also this backlog that the 28 days for the first time you see a primary care physician before they accept you as a patient, that's something that people are looking at going, well, wait a minute. I mean, 30 days to wait to even get in there. And then there's obviously the whole convenience aspect, which is, when I'm sick, I might be sick on Saturday, I might be sick at 8:00 at night. And, it's one of those things that this is what we're hearing from the millennial generation. And now you have the Aetna CVS deal. You have Walmart getting into it pretty heavily. You have other competitors that are starting to rise. It would really not be good for healthcare organizations to ignore this trend. So you mentioned some of the things that they're going to be doing. What are, you talked about telemedicine. What are some things we can do for shorter wait times? What are the things we can do for more transparency of cost, more convenient hours? Is it all digital, or is it a combination of things?
Well, I think it's got to be a combination. And I think that the way that health systems should try to think about this, which might be a little bit different or different perspective, is, to me, it's a classic market segmentation problem. Percentage of primary care is extraordinarily transactional, right? Things like strep throat, UTI and sinus headaches and all those things. That's a situation where patients need a quick, convenient fix, right? But as soon as you learn that you've got a significant disease, right, you need a relationship with a clinician that can help you learn how to manage that disease and empower you. And so I think health systems need to segment their own markets and provide services at different levels that meet patients where they need to be met. and move them into the right sites of care to help to address the issues that they're facing. And I actually think this is going to continue, not primary care, but we're starting to see the emergence of, in orthopedics, like it's almost the Panera Bread of joint replacement, right? Where you can commoditize and build products that are really good at outstanding service and convenience for particular segments of the market. And that's how they need to be thinking about where to deploy the right capabilities and technologies to meet these different segments of the market.
Yeah, I read a post recently where somebody said, healthcare isn't one business. Healthcare is 100 disparate businesses being run under one umbrella, and that's really true. And we need to look at the different ways we can really customize these services. Okay, so that's our first story. I'm going to kick it to you to set up our next story.
Great. I think there were two candidates. Do you want to go with the patient experience story, or do we want to go with the health economics story? Your call.
Well, let's go with the CMS story, and then I will get back to some of the other stuff in the back and forth on the Soundbites section.
Great. So I'm probably one of the few people that gets excited when there's new announcements from the federal government about payment models and regulation. On July 12th, and I think MedCity News or Healthcare Informatics both broke the story right away, but you can find these stories all over the internet. CMS did something that I think is important. I think the Trump administration wanted to make a statement about how they're going to help be more transformative to the healthcare industry. And to some degree, they just took a bunch of older ideas and repackaged them with new names. But they sort of declared two things. One is that the traditional ways we've looked at documentation and billing for consultative services were outdated and onerous, with some fixes there, which has been met with a lot of actual resistance, which I think everybody has been surprised at from the medical associations and physicians. But the second and more important from my perspective thing that the administration is doing is to recognize that healthcare has really poor communication architecture. We've designed the system to be responsive and reactive. And as new technology has hit the market broadly in the commercial space, it's been slower to adopt in healthcare. And the really simple way to look at this is if you talk to many doctors that are in Epic or Cerner and have a portal, they're a little grumpy about having to answer patients' questions because they're not paid for it, right? They see this as now I have to spend even more time doing stuff that I'm not getting paid for. And so CMS announced in an effort to modernize the way that we communicate in healthcare and to help support those new methods, really a couple of new incentives for doctors. And one is to say that we're going to pay doctors for what they're calling a virtual check-in. And that is if a patient is at home, right, checking in with their doctor, and the doctor has to, or the doctor's team has an opportunity to intervene and provide guidance and counseling to patients, that there's a payment associated with that. And the second one that I think is even more interesting is they're really putting the foot on the gas for physician organizations that deploy remote patient monitoring technologies, right? How do we use technology to continuously surveil our patients, make sure that they're on track and give us early warning signs when they aren't? And this stuff starts to become material. I think in our analysis, physicians that engage with their patients using these capabilities can earn $150 to $200 for every new patient that they get on board. So we're starting to see real economics to support the use of advanced technology to interact with patients in more convenient ways.
Yeah, and now, so I guess my question to you is going to be, is this going to be the tipping point? Because it's kind of, when I was sitting in the CIO chair, the telehealth uptake was not that, at least the telehealth within the health system was the telestroke and whatnot was taking off pretty significantly. But the telehealth between a physician and the patient was a very slow uptake, and remote patient monitoring was very hard to get funded.
Yeah.
And so do you think this will be the tipping point that starts to really drive these use cases up?
So I'll start by saying I'm an optimist, and that colors everything that I do, and I think. I think that this will be highly rewarding to organizations that find the right capabilities that meet the regulatory statutes to get paid. You know, from a HealthLoop perspective, if you look over the last 6 years, you know, the first cohort of people that purchased these types of technologies did it from a place of, I want to provide the most outstanding service to patients in my community to differentiate myself and impress my patients. It came from a place of real goodness, right? Because there was no economic benefit to better outcomes at lower costs in their fee-for-service model. And those are the good guys and gals, the ones that are really in it in making the investments for the right reasons. The second major wave of adoption here has been well aligned to the value-based that have significant economic reward for higher quality outcomes at lower costs. And in my opinion, the best and most meaningful models are the bundled payment models. ACOs are just a little bit weak on the edge. Bundles go right into the heart of cost reduction and provide really strong rewards to doctors that manage their patients well. And so in our analysis, we've done a lot of research and publishing on this. You know, a physician in a higher acuity state can save $700 to $1,000 per case, right, by deploying these technologies. So there's real teeth, but in order to feel that reward, it takes real economic analysis, right? I mean, you're looking at, you know, utilization of healthcare services over 90 days for every single patient, and that's not easy to measure and track. And I think now that we look at these new models, it's just sort of the easy button, right? It says to providers, not only is it easy to get paid for this, the payments will not only cover the cost of the technology, but give you a reasonable margin around it. It's the right thing to do. It drives higher quality. And so I do think it's going to act as a lubricant in the marketplace to see adoption really, really come to scale.
Yeah, I agree with you. Are the bundled payments for orthopedics, are those still progressing at the same pace they were under the Obama administration, or has that slowed down?
So both. So after Trump, the Trump administration came in, Secretary Price, who is the Secretary of Health and Human Services, the one that had to resign because of his private jet issue, immediately repealed the program, which I think was an incredible disservice to taxpayers and to patients, because this was a model that we know delivers superior clinical outcomes and has a significant reduction in costs. The good news is they came back and implemented what is called BPCI Advanced and launched that on Jan 1 of early January this year, and actually just went live last week. And they just announced a couple days ago the participation rates in the new voluntary bundle payment model, and it eclipses what we've seen in the past. So I think doctors now have seen enough data that tells them that they can make a lot more money, right, by taking risk around their cases, and so they're engaged. And I do think it's important to segment those. In surgical domains, it is crystal clear. In medical domains, it's proven to be less easy to demonstrate better economics every single time.
So this is still knees and hips, essentially, or is it beyond that?
Yeah, no, there's I want to say 38 conditions. It's a mix of med surg. There's a lot of spine, ENT, GI is in there, and then a lot of the traditional exacerbations of chronic disease, heart failure, COPD, pneumonia, et cetera. So it's a pretty strong mix. I was just looking at the data yesterday. You do see spikes a lot nationally in orthopedics and spine and cardiovascular surgery. So those tend to be the ones where physicians know that they can be heavily rewarded by participating and doing it well.
Great. All right. Well, I'm gonna transition to Soundbites. I'm also going to apologize to our listeners. I'm actually recording from a hotel room, which has its pluses and minuses. Every now and then, one of your words will drop out. And I know people are going to be like, what did he say? Well, you know, I'm understanding it. Only one word or here or there is dropping out, so I think we're going to be fine. So We're going to transition to Soundbites. During this section, I typically toss out about 5 questions. Try to stay to 1 to 3 minute answers. If you go longer, I'm not going to stop you. It's a guideline, not a rule. And if you want, you can throw questions back at me. I cannot guarantee any answers because I haven't prepared any answers. So this is my turn to ask you some questions. So when we first met, the thing that struck me was you talked about empathy in design, empathy in the design of digital tools, and how that could really extend the empathy of the creator and empathy of the organization to those patients. Can you give our listeners a little background on that concept?
Yeah, and I'll share a story of how I learned the value here. Empathy in design is a simple concept. Put yourself in the shoes of the user, right? And try to experience their day, their life, their concerns through their eyes, and try to meet them with a solution that's going to be really assistive, helpful, and productive for them. And moving to Silicon Valley is a bizarre experience, right? It's a crazy world here. And I was out on a fundraising circuit for our Series A financings. This is years ago. And I had the opportunity to pitch to Greylock Ventures, which is a big venture capital group here in the Valley. And one of their partners is a guy named Josh Ellman. And Josh was the principal product designer at Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn in the sort of the moment when those companies went like this. Clearly he's a special guy. He probably doesn't remember our conversation. I did a demonstration for him of HealthLoop, and at that moment in time, HealthLoop was really about how do we identify the patients that need help. And it was a really clinical mindset. It would be like, Bill, what's your weight today? Bill, did you take your meds today? Do you have any chest pain today? All about getting information from me, right? As a doctor. And he stood back and he said, Todd, the problem with your software is it has no soul. I said, okay, what does that mean? And he says, when we designed LinkedIn or we designed Facebook, every single time a user interacted with a screen, we tried to make sure that there was a tone in a voice, in a familiarity, and we treat our product as if it's a thoughtful, compassionate person. So I reflected on that and said, HealthLoop isn't a software. HealthLoop is like the best nurse you've ever had, and she's compassionate and she's thoughtful and she knows that you're in pain and she knows that you're scared and she knows that you have questions. And we really flipped in our mind what it meant to be a user of this technology, and started to invest in a content team of physicians and nurses, and we call them empathologists, right, to script these experiences that acknowledge what a patient is going through and put it through a tone and a voice that could be helpful to them. And then I think on the professional side, there's a sort of another view on this is from the provider experience, I think all too often nurses and PAs and doctors feel like they're on a treadmill, one patient to the next, one patient to the next. And one of the things that we believe, I think many people believe, is that clinician burnout is maybe one of the biggest risks to our healthcare delivery system. What we experienced with HealthLoop was that patients were really impressed with this experience. Like, wow, my doctor's checking in on me every day. I've never seen anything like that. And so we capture from patients their sentiment, right? Gratitude, and serve it back to doctors, nurses, medical assistants. We call it patient love. And it's this continuous feedback loop that really reminds clinicians that what they're doing, what their work is, it matters. Their patients adore them, they're grateful, and it is a very, very powerful thing for physicians and their teams to see when they participate with HealthLoop.
Yeah, on the show, I usually don't let people talk about their product all that much, but I think your approach is so strong, and I think it's a message that needs to get out there. So, which leads me to my next question, which is, let's assume I'm a CIO who's chosen to create my own portal or my own experience for patients. What process would you coach me to take to ensure that my design has has a deep understanding of the person and empathy towards the person that's going to be using it?
Yeah. I guess I'll start by saying I think we've really missed in this domain, right? The version 1 of portals has really taken what electronic medical records are really good at, which is storage and retention of data for patients, and express that data to patients like, what are my lab results? What are my test results? But really, I think what patients are worried about is, when will I get better? What does this new diagnosis mean for my life, right? Am I going to live? What are the side effects? And so patients' concerns aren't what is their test result, it is what's going to happen to me. And so I think the first thing that I would recommend to CIOs is think about the window through which patients are meeting you. And again, segmentation matters. If I'm a healthy millennial that just needs to take care of a transactional issue, then boy, that should be fast, convenient, easy, quick, delightful. But if I'm a cancer patient, it needs to be very, very different. So segment your market and bring the solutions. And the other thing, we're seeing this trend of health systems now wanting to build their own portal, right? Build their own front door, the digital on-ramp to the health system. And I was in a roundtable with the CEO of a very large health system in the Southeast a couple of weeks ago. He says, we are going to build the best tools and give patients exactly what we need by owning the patient, right? We're going to give them everything we need. We're going to own the patient. And I think it's so short-sighted because patients, when they go through particularly higher acuity episodes of care, you're often not their only provider, right? They need to see, this skilled nursing facility, this physical therapy group. And so I think health systems need to adopt a mentality that they are an important part of the patient's experience, but they're not the only part. So they should make it frictionless for other providers across their community to collaborate around best outcomes.
So a little insight into the show. I send these 5 questions over 24 hours before we actually do the show. But I'm gonna hit you with a question that's not on here, only because I'm curious. So if we want our technology to have a soul, as you described it earlier, the EHR is the most predominant, pervasive technology we have. What could we do to give it a soul so that it could, to really see the journey of the physician and the journey of the clinician who are really struggling at the hands of the EHR today? What do you think there's anything we could do there?
Yes. So I was sort of daydreaming in response to some of your other questions around, what can we do better to serve our healthcare professionals? And can you imagine this for a second? How long have we been in the world of high tech and meaningful use? We're probably about a 10-year, 12-year.
Yeah.
Can you imagine what our clinical tools would be like if that program was designed around a couple of very, very simple drivers? One is, step one, provider organization, all your orders and medical information needs to be digitized. It needs to be on demand and available digitally. We don't care how you do it, but it needs to be digital. Second, you're going to get a bonus payment depending on how your physicians, nurses, and staff rate their experience with the EMR, right? How delighted is the doctor with the EMR? How delighted is the nurse with the EMR? Because the satisfaction with EMRs across the country by clinicians, they typically have a negative net promoter score, right? People are not thrilled with these tools. And what if that was the driver for how you get rewarded with more money, is that your clinicians love this? And then the third rail to make sure that this serves our communities well is, let's just look at patient satisfaction and make sure that is also a buoyant lever in those. So just imagine the types of tools that a CIO would be able to purchase or build if that was the driving economic force behind adoption. And that's just not been the case, right? So I think just going back to some simple ideas, that the people that use these technologies, the more we can delight and impress them and help them be efficient, the better off we'll be.
Yeah, gosh, we could talk about this for a while, but we're running out of time here. So let me go to the third question I had sent over to you, which is, with this digital empathy, with these tools that have empathy built in, talk to me about the level of engagement that you've seen with these kinds of tools and with their physician.
Yeah, you can continuously measure engagement, and I think there's some cohort of individual that is just going to always be the good patient, which means whenever their doctor reaches out to them and asks them to do it, they will do it, no matter how poor the experience is, no matter how irrelevant it is. And that's maybe 17 to 20% of people are just sort of intrinsically motivated to be responsive and courteous and quick to respond. So that leaves a huge spectrum of work to do. And I think the keys to engagement are simpler than we want them to be. Sometimes it's, are we delivering something that's pertinent and relevant to me right now, right? Is this useful? And, think about the ways that hospitals typically engage with patients, in the post-acute phase. It's a robocall, maybe it's an HCAP survey. I don't care about any of that, right? But when humans are reaching out to, or technology is reaching out to patients to provide relevant, pertinent, useful information at the right time, patients want that, right? Patients don't want bad outcomes. Patients don't want to spend more than they need to on their healthcare costs. And so as long as they feel like it's a useful, pertinent, relevant, and personalized interaction, they're on board. And it's not that hard. You just have to meet them with what they need and where they are.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so this is a selfish question. Let's talk about implementation from a digital entrepreneur standpoint. What are the characteristics or activities that organizations that have successful implementations, what do they have in common? Because I know you probably have, because we had this, to be honest with you, there were some digital entrepreneurs that came in that we implemented really well, and there's others that we didn't. And I'm sure you have clients, some that have implemented extremely well and some that you're still waiting for, to move through contracting or something to that effect. So what are some of the characteristics that you have seen that lead to success?
Yeah, I mean, it's conviction, right? System have conviction around a thesis and really work to identify the right partner and treat them like a partner, and make real investments to achieve those outcomes, right? Find ways to really, really go strong. I think it's almost that simple. And clearly when there's the right economic incentives and organizational objectives that we can align those incentives together, it works. We've seen, and you've seen this, the emergence of the pilot, right? There's so many damn pilots, and now we have innovation centers that just, they're pilot wood chipper factories. And on the one hand, it's great that, health systems get to take a test run for digital innovations, and digital innovators get some test runs with hospitals. But more often than not, it results in failure. And it results in failure because it gives everybody an opt-out, right? A chance to take the exit ramp, as opposed to just saying, look, we're committed to this one way or the other. We will make this succeed. This is where we're going, and we're going to go big. And I think that's really the critical, like when a health system has conviction and is committed to achieving real outcomes and is willing to expend the energy to get the change management inside, the sky's the limit, right? You can do amazing things. Without that conviction, you can sputter.
Yeah, and I think the conviction, I think that's a great answer, by the way. I think the conviction starts with, what problems are we trying to solve? I think too many health systems are trying to solve 100 problems, and you can't solve 100 or more problems every year. You almost have to say, these are the 15 to 20 problems we are going to solve this year, and we're going to focus our energy, our resources, our investments on these 15 to 20 problems. It depends on the size of the organization, but I just find that the focus of the organization is spread so wide. So there's a sort of a conviction that these 20 problems are the most relevant to our community that we serve right now. Yeah. So last question, what's the one thing Health IT can do to most dramatically improve patient care from your perspective? Yeah,
I think it's, might be odd, but I say take risks. Actually take risks. The healthcare IT community, I feel like vendors have underserved their customers forever, right? Healthcare IT has not been sexy. We've seen waves of different EMR vendors come and go over the last 30 years. The technology lags 10 to 15 years behind what we expect in other areas. And I think that providers should and squeeze outside of their comfort zone. And don't choose IBM. That IBM is a big player in the space, but make a bet with something new and innovative, and be prepared and accept failure as a good outcome. Right? Failure is something that we can learn from. But take some risks. Try something new and different. Don't be afraid, right, to try things that are new and different.
Yeah, obviously referring to the old adage that no one gets fired by choosing IBM. You're saying sometimes the solutions are outside of the traditional players that are in the space, and I think that's really true. Walk the side aisles of the HIMSS conference, not necessarily the main aisle.
That's right.
So Todd, hey, thank you for coming on the show. And is there a good way for people to follow you, or do you have any time in your life to actually be active in social media?
Sort of. I have a marketing team that does a lot of that stuff. So you can follow us on Twitter at HealthLoop. But I love talking to providers out in the market and interesting people. So I would just invite people to email me directly at todd@healthloop.com. I'm always eager to entertain a conversation.
That's great. Last week we had actually somebody share their cell phone number. So I'm not going to go that far with you. But if people want to get a hold of you via cell phone, they can contact me as well. Awesome. Hey, you can follow me at the Patient CIO on Twitter, Health Lyric's website, thisweekinhealthit.com website. The show's Twitter handle is This Week in HIT, and you can catch all the videos on the YouTube channel. From today, we'll probably put another 7 out there. We're getting up to around a little over 350 videos now on the channel. Great resource for IT staff out there, especially those that are looking to take risks. There's a lot of great content from some of the people who are at the forefront of that. So please check back every Friday for more news, information, and commentary from industry influencers. That's all for now.